Hello and welcome to Shikanime. My name is Lauren and today I am looking at another Annie News video. This is once again about Pandora's actor. It's the second in a series about Pandora's actor. So this one is how strong is Pandora's actor? Pandora's actor's true power explained in the Doppelgangers. So good, because I've been enjoying these because last time I got a lot of sad information about Momonga's real life human persona, which was crushing, and lots of introspection into his actual mentality, and the reasons behind Pandora's actor, which I thought was really interesting and clever. So this time we're going to continue to answer questions that I have had for quite a while about this particular character. And again, people have always try to tell me how I can tell when it's him and not somebody else. I'm like, I can't. He fools me every single time. So anyway, today we're talking about doppelgangers. So I was like, does that mean that he can completely, because he can take over, use their power set too, right? It gets kind of mystique-y, but better, right? Because she can't use their she fights with Wolverine claws before. I don't know. Anyway, we're about to find out. So let's begin.
Surprisingly, in Overlord, doppelgangers are one of the few races whose abilities are fairly well defined and explained. So unlike last time, where we talked about various historical influences on Pandora's actor that weren't entirely related to Overlord itself, this time we're going to dive deep into the facts of the novel. So join me as we take a look at everything from his build and abilities to a very extensive breakdown as to what exactly a doppelganger is, to hopefully answer the question in the title by not actually answering the question at all. How strong is Pandora's actor?
Okay.
Before we start though, just the usual quick plug of my Overlord merch. You can get the Nazarick emblem and succubate shirts from—
Because I know in general what a doppelganger is, but I don't know how it works within, I know what one is in the context of mythology, but not necessarily within the context of a game like this. So it's always interesting to find that kind of stuff out.
From the Teespring link in the description. Now, let's begin. If we start with his build, Pandora's actor has 45 levels dedicated to racial classes, with 15 in Doppelganger, 10 more in Greater Doppelganger, then the remaining 20 are unknown. Just like all the other heteromorphic races, being a doppelganger gives you access to a full racial class tree, and you gain the ability to choose from a multitude of subvariants as you level. So doppelganger would seem to be the first, then greater doppelganger after that, and beyond that, in the remaining unknown 20 levels, is a possibility of even more powerful variants. As I'm throwing the word doppelganger around, there is the chance that many of you may not even know what a doppelganger is, so allow me to give you a bit of insight into the term. The word originates from mid-19th century Germany as a descriptive term for paranormal apparitions, or beings, that appear identical to another living person. The word itself is a combination of two nouns, with doppel meaning double and ganger meaning walking. In this classical sense, a doppelganger isn't someone that transforms as we're familiar with. It's closer to a creature that was born as an identical clone. But as a popular term in fantasy games, it's frequently used to refer to mythological creatures who can adopt the form of others. Though they aren't just mere shapeshifters who can assume an alternate form. They actively mimic other individuals, typically for nefarious purposes, meaning that not only can they transform into other creatures and imitate their appearance, but they can also copy their capabilities.
Right. So that's what I was thinking. I was like, I think that sometimes they can do that. And I know that in some media, they will keep whoever, if they're trying to take over their life, they'll keep that person alive because it lets them kind of tap into their thoughts and remember their history and everything so that they can answer those questions of tell me something only you would know. It's I do know it though. It would easily fool you.
Special attacks, spells, racial abilities. In their new form, a doppelganger has access to pretty much anything the original has access to. This is no mere lookalike.
Which is kind of crazy.
No, this is a full-on transformation. When transformed,
I mean, it makes it very OP, right? The fact that they can, I'm waiting to see if he's going to say what the downsides of this are for the doppelganger. Because it's you just, whoever's the most powerful person you know, now you're the most powerful person you know.
Gain all the benefits and drawbacks of their new form, as if their new form was their regular. Both racial weaknesses and racial advantages are adopted, and their base stats are even adjusted to be equivalent to the original. The only thing a doppelganger can't imitate is special equipment and gear. While they
Right,
can
'cause
look as
that's
if they
not
are wearing the
organic.
gear if need be, this is merely for appearances only, and they don't gain any of its benefits or stat boosts. That being said, the doppelganger can always simply wear the equipment in question
Right.
if they can somehow obtain it. As a matter of fact, doppelgangers can bypass any race or class restrictions on the gear in question. Some gear can only be worn by, say, dwarves or birdmen. Some weapons can only be wielded by warriors, others only by mages. But a doppelganger can ignore all these limitations and restrictions, though it's not clear whether they innately ignore all restrictions regardless of what form they assume, or whether they have to assume the form of a being with a particular race or class in order to utilize particular pieces of equipment restricted to that race or class. Now, as I go on to further speak of the finer details on the doppelganger race, just remember that they all apply to Pandora's actor. Though I may not be talking about him explicitly, it's still just as relevant. So
Right.
moving on, doppelgangers, unlike shapeshifters, must imitate a specific form belonging to someone else. They cannot make modifications.
Right. Okay. So that's the difference then. Okay. I was wondering what he was thinking the actual difference is. It's because shapeshifters they can do whatever they want to. Like, they don't have to be a specific person. Doppelgangers do have to be a specific person. So you are doing a little bit of identity theft. But again, okay, if sure.
To the form, nor can they create their own, meaning it has to be a form belonging to someone else, and it can only be imitated exactly. It's possible that they must first witness, meet, or study the individual in question before they can transform into them. But a doppelganger's imitation is moderately dependent upon the perception that others have on the form that they've chosen. Once transformed, a doppelganger actively reads the surface thoughts of those who knew the person being imitated, and it uses that to subtly adjust its behavior and appearance to match the expectations that they have.
Oh, cool. Okay. Because like I was saying, I'd heard of stories where like the doppelganger can take the memories of the person they're imitating, but that's really cool that they're like, that they're taking the abilities, the memories of the people around them as like maybe as well, but like for sure around them. That's cool.
And when I say surface thoughts, I'm actually referring to a limited telepathy effect that doesn't quite go to the extent of reading a person's past memories or really accessing their subconscious, but it's more simply listening to the voice in their head, their surface thoughts. Thus, a doppelganger is ironically most effective against the people who knew that person extremely well, since they would have the most accurate perceptions. It's quite the interesting tactic to refine one's imitation, and I'm sure Pandora's actor excels at it given his high-level genius. Now, being aware of this basic telepathy, it's not really surprising that the greatest threat to a doppelganger is a crowd or party, as it may have difficulty melding all of their expectations together or discerning which individuals have the most reliable and accurate understanding of the person that they're meant to imitate. If everyone in a large group hates them out of prejudice rather than personal first-hand experience, they may act out of character in an attempt to reinforce that prejudice.
Okay, that tracks. I was gonna say, like, if everyone hates them because of prejudice, then they're also likely to just be fine no matter what they do because they are around people who already hate them because of that prejudice, and they're keyed in to see those kinds of behaviors anyway. They're expecting to see it. So it's like, I feel like that would be okay, but like if you're with people who like them for various reasons and who are friends with them, but they're acting like really off because one friend sees them in one way and another sees them in a different way. It's like, that could be tricky.
Then close friends who later hear of the events might grow suspicious that their buddy was acting all weird. Even more so, since the reading of surface thoughts is a form of attack, it can be resisted or outright negated by immunities, such as Ainz's passive undead immunity to mind-affecting attacks. Now,
sorry, excuse me. I have, sometimes with the lights, I think it's the lights that do it. Also, I'm very tired, but like the lights, I think the lights get me sometimes. I swear I'm not like, I feel like people are like, oh, she yawns, she's bored. I'm like, I'm not, I just couldn't stop it.
You may be wondering, how the hell did this work in the world of Yggdrasil? Because the last time I checked, video games didn't let you listen to people's thoughts. Well, all of this was merely a footnote in the bestiary lore entry in the game. But after having migrated...
I mean, like, okay, so for me, that didn't really occur to me, but it sounds like something that, like, what you would do in, like, a D&D game is you'd roll for it. Like, if somebody is casting this on you, you would have to like have a saving throw, like a wisdom saving throw, to see if you can resist the surface thought like spell essentially. So then if you fail, then you'd have to tell the person who is, or the DM, you'd have to tell them what you're thinking. But if you succeed, then you succeed. You don't have to worry about it. So that's how it would go in D&D. Because like I've seen that happen before, where it's like somebody is reading a thought, or like they cast charm person, or something of that nature. And like I have to do a lot of like insight checks. It's like, are they lying? And so like I will contest their charisma essentially, usually with a wisdom roll. And it allows me to get in their head a little bit without, it's not magic in my character's case, but you can contest those. It's just a roll of the die. So that's what I would assume.
To the New World, it became an active and functional mechanic. Presumably, in the game, you could use doppelgangers to imitate other players to trick their friends and guildmates, or to beat certain quests, or even just as a versatile generalist who can cover multiple roles. Let's shift to a bigger question now. Who and what exactly can a doppelganger imitate at each level? A standard doppelganger, which maxes out at 15 levels, can imitate any creature up to level 40. A greater doppelganger, which maxes out at an additional 10 levels, can imitate any creature up to level 60. Incidentally, you can distinguish between the two based on the number of fingers that they have on each hand in their doppelganger form.
What?
Greater doppelgangers have 4, and regular doppelgangers have 3.
Oh,
and
cool!
Since Pandora's actor is able to imitate creatures up to level 100, namely all of the supreme ones, there are presumably more powerful doppelganger types. And once again, presumably, that's what the rest of his 20 or so racial levels are dedicated to.
Makes sense.
Though he still only has 4 fingers per hand. Perhaps there's a hidden doppelganger level above these ones that maxes out at 5 levels, similar to Ainz's Overlord. Maybe something like an Ultra or Super Doppelganger. Even a lesser doppelganger below the standard one would allow us to make more sense of this. I mean, the possibility seems relatively balanced. If a lesser doppelganger requires 15 levels, then it can imitate creatures up to level 20. Then the standard would require another 15 racial levels and bring us up to 30, while allowing for imitations up to level 40. Then the greater doppelganger would bring us up to 40 racial levels, while allowing for an imitation up to level 60. And finally, the super ultra doppelganger, which
I love that he's like, he's like, you know what? It's called the super ultra doppelganger now. I've decided. Super Saiyan 2.
costs another 5 racial levels, brings us to Pandora's 45, and would allow for that imitation up to any level.
Cool.
Alternatively, perhaps the first 60 levels are just relatively easy to imitate, and the remaining 40 require certain specializations to achieve.
That would be cool
For
too.
instance, there could very well be doppelganger variants or subtypes that are specialized towards improving specific forms over others. If that was the case, then there's probably a doppelganger subrace that specializes in imitating heteromorphs, and can break past that normal level limit of 60 that greater doppelgangers have.
Okay, but they wouldn't necessarily be able to do it for other creatures of those higher levels. That's cool. And I like it when, like, even though this is all just speculation, I do like it when it's like, okay, well, let's figure out what the limitations are and like how they might have used, because again, everything was supposed to be like, Momonga was very strategic, right, in the characters he created, and I feel like as a guild they were pretty strategic in what they were up to. So like just tweaking things here and there and like focusing in on one thing, I really like that. I think that's really, really cool. And I like that dynamic because in like D&D as well. Because like I said, my main character is a inquisitive rogue, which means that she's maxed out in a lot of wisdom modifiers. Like it's really, really difficult to lie to her. If she's doing an insight check on somebody and she rolls less than, and I roll, she roll less than like an 8, you can't roll less than an 8. Like 8 is like the minimum. Like you're always going to add 10 or whatever to 8. Like you can't fail it, essentially. When I'm trying to do an insight check, I can't fail, which is great. But it also means like I didn't put as much stats into the dex stuff, or the intelligence modifiers. So checking for traps, not a great thing. Like she's not as good at lock picking, you know. So it's like you figure things out based on the kind of character you want to create. And so in this case, Pandora's case, like we're all a thing of heteromorphs, right? So basically, since we're all heteromorphs, he can do heteromorph transitions. I think that's interesting. I think it's cool to I like looking at limitations because it forces you to get creative.
Once again, only when imitating heteromorphs due to that special subvariant. Though this is just speculation.
Yeah, it's a theory.
Those last 20 racial levels could very well be anything. But given the fact that he can imitate level 100 beings, we can be certain that it is some kind of doppelganger. Now, you might be thinking, doppelgangers sound incredibly broken, but there are actually a good deal of limitations and drawbacks.
Let's talk about it.
Obviously, I've already explained the weaknesses of being unable to replicate equipment, and as it is with any MMO, equipment can change everything. Just look at Ainz's fight with Sheltier.
Be gone!
So, by default, a doppelganger is much less capable than what they're imitating unless they already have comparable equipment for themselves. Another potential limitation could be the number of transformations permitted per day, though it's not too clear whether one actually exists, or if there's even a time limit on the duration of the
I was wondering about a time
itself.
limit.
But most special abilities like this do impose some kind of threshold. This is important for
it lasts for an hour or whatever. Because I was like, otherwise it is so OP. Because they could just kill a really powerful creature because they can take over their stats essentially, and then just be them forever. But if there's a time limit, that makes sense.
Reasons. First, if you have to switch repeatedly or use up time, you may eventually run out, and you'll become stuck in a particular form for an extended period of time, or even revert to your lesser doppelganger form.
Okay.
Second, there are actually certain spells that can revert or disable a doppelganger's shapeshifting ability. We're not given any specific name or their level, but apparently Ainz knows that a few of them exist. Lower leveled variations simply revert them to their doppelganger form, forcing them to spend time and potentially one of their limited daily uses to transform back. While stronger variations not only revert them, they also disable further transformations for an extended amount of time.
Okay.
And doppelgangers in their base form are quite weak, much weaker than similar units of their level. So during the time that they're in their doppelganger form, they're actually quite vulnerable and pretty useless. Of course, wasting time to cast such a spell on a hunch that a person that you're with is actually a doppelganger can give your enemy the advantage, so it's not very practical to use it every fight. Okay, so it may seem like a nice exploit to create an army of level 45 doppelganger NPCs and have them go around imitating level 100 guards. But if you were to fight a foe that knows or suspects that your army is made up of doppelgangers, a single spell can turn your army into a giant XP farm. Though it's highly doubtful that anyone in the New World knows or has access to such spells, so Pandora's actor himself should be fine. Furthermore, though not confirmed, I suspect that there's an additional limitation placed on doppelgangers, namely that they can't transform into anything that's a higher level than they are. Also, it would seem that by extrapolating a bit of information from the light novel, the total number of forms that a doppelganger has access to seems to be dependent on their level. Though, once again, it's not stated explicitly in the light novel.
Because, that also makes sense because, talking about, spell slots or whatever, too, are limited to your level. I mean, I don't know too much about spell slots because I've literally never played a caster character. But, I know that it's limited. It's you've got a couple of things you can do, you can 2 cantrips or whatever, you can do whatever. But, a lot of the times, limited, very limited spell slots, especially for lower levels. And it would make sense that you wouldn't be able to go higher than your level, but I thought that they just explained that Pandora's actor is a level 60 or something, and he can imitate level hundreds, so I'm not entirely sure. I think I might have missed something there.
It's not as if they can just copy anyone they've ever seen at any time. they only have a limited number that they can choose from at any given moment. As a matter of fact, since Nabe only has one form other than her normal doppelganger appearance and one level of doppelganger, while Pandora's actor has 45 forms and 45 levels of we assume to be doppelganger, from this, it would seem that you gain one additional form for each level of doppelganger that you obtain.
Okay.
Naturally, you'd assume that these weren't permanent choices that took up a transformation slot forever. But whether you could swap them out for others or not is still not clear. I mean, it wouldn't really make sense to not be able to swap out forms.
Right.
Especially if you're leveling up early on in the game and have a low-level form that you want to replace with a stronger one.
Yeah, you would absolutely should be able to switch things out. Again, to go back to D&D, like wizards they like learn new spells every night, you know, like for the next day. Like they have to take some depending on your DM, but like they have to learn a different spell, like, but they can switch them out every single day if they want to, depending on what they think they'll use on that day. Which just sounds exhausting. I don't really ever want to play a wizard.
After all, Yggdrasil did have a global respec mechanic, and you can use that to quickly remove 5 levels that you didn't like. You could very easily gain those 5 levels back relatively quickly due to the way that XP was tuned. Most players got to level 100 pretty fast, and the bulk of your power was dependent on gear, build, and tactics, so players didn't really mind dying as a method of respecking. So if there actually was no method of replacing old forms that you didn't like with new ones manually, then you could simply die and lose access to 5 forms along with the 5 levels that you lost. Of course, this option isn't so easily mimicked in the new world. You don't automatically
dying
respawn
is a
back
lot
in some
harder.
kind of safe zone. You have to be resurrected with a spell of at least level 5 or higher, and very few denizens outside of Nazarick have access to such spells. The last and probably
And he
most
used like an entire room of gold too as the components in that resurrection spell.
important limitation is that a doppelganger's imitation isn't perfect. While they can imitate all of the abilities of a creature, their efficacy with said abilities is reduced relative to the original. I'm going to be pulling out a few numbers right now, so I'll try to make this as easily digestible as possible.
Thank you.
But specifically,
numbers.
while a greater doppelganger can imitate creatures up to level 60, its actual abilities are only around 80 to 90% as potent as the original.
Okay.
For example, Pandora's actor can imitate the guild members of Ainz Ul Gom, a selection of level 100 creatures, but with only 80% of their potency. Base stats such as HP, MP, physical attack, magical defense, magical defense, agility, and resistances are changed to be equal to the original. But the actual output of any special ability or attack is 20% less.
Alright.
Now, at first glance,
That does make sense.
doesn't seem like a significant drawback.
It could be.
A 20% penalty in exchange for being able to imitate 45 different creatures.
I mean, it feels like it could be though, because okay, again, I'm gonna talk about D&D another time, but like there are certain spells, for instance, that use 5d6, right? So you take away one of those d6, and now you have 4d6. That can still be it's not insignificant amount of damage, because like what if you had that one last d6 is the one that would have rolled a 6, and the other 4 all roll 1s, so now I don't know. I feel like that could be a kind of big difference. And like even just like for me, when I get to add die for like sneak attacks, because like I've got like weapons and stuff, it's like I'll use 3d6 for the what, but I get to add I only use like what is it? It's like this gets to use 2d6 or something, but then I get to add 2d6 for sneak attack. If I don't get those extra die, I'm like, ooh, I'm not doing much damage, am I? Like I feel like just taking away just that little bit is important. You can still do some serious damage, of course, but like having the extra 20%, it gives that little extra kick. It's helpful.
Seems reasonable. You can be an ultra-specialized crafter, or a spellcaster, or a warrior with a perfectly optimal and hyper-specialized build, then fill basically any role, but also be able to ignore any downsides or limitations at will by transforming into something else. And all it costs is a measly 20% potency reduction.
Yeah.
Right? Well, it's not quite as simple as it sounds. First of all, it's hard to predict what a 20% reduction in attack power or defense actually leads into in terms of damage output or survivability. After all, attack power and defense interact with each other. So let's take a look at a simple example and do some quick maths. Say my special attack does 1000 damage per hit,
Hi, Midori.
and my defensive skill blocks 800 damage. If I was fighting someone with identical stats to myself, I'd do 200 damage per hit to them, and they'd deal 200 damage to me. But if I'm fighting against a doppelganger with only 80% potency on their skills identical to mine, then that means the total damage they do with their attack is 800, and their defensive skill is now only able to block 640 damage.
Oof.
If they were to hit me now, their 800 damage goes up against my 800 defense and does 0 damage each hit, whereas if I hit them, my 1000 attack versus their 640 defense means
Oof.
I now do 360 damage per hit.
That's so bad!
Consider for a moment the
That's a
implications of that. A mere 20% debuff means that they'll now take 80% more damage than if they weren't a doppelganger but still had identical stats to me. And their 20% lower attack means they'll essentially do no damage, and I'm standing here laughing like Kirito on that bridge. So from this basic example, we see a 20% difference in the input leads to a well over 80% difference in the output.
Which, I mean, luckily for the denizens of Nazarick in this new world, means that Pandora's actor will pretty much always be fine. But like, I can see where the trouble would be.
Well, Yggdrasil probably operates on a much more complicated damage formula, as most games tend to do. Since we don't know exactly what it is, it's extremely difficult to determine what 20% lower potency actually translates to. You can apply a similar logic to a lot of other things. For instance, what does 80% potency mean when applied to things like instant death spells? Does it reduce the chances of success? If so, how does that work? What's the formula for calculating the chances of inflicting a negative status effect on an opponent? Does it scale based on a spell potency variable, which is reduced by an enemy's resistance or agility stat? So if I go from 1000 spell potency to 800 spell potency versus the enemy's 900 resistance stat, then what are the chances that my debuff is now successful? Perhaps it could be something as simple as if I initially had a 50% chance of causing instant death, then an 80% potency would reduce that to a 40% chance because of the way that probabilities work. There's just a whole bunch of variables that need to be considered. For the sake of simplicity, let's just assume that the actual overall output of any activity will work out to be 80% of the original, meaning a fixed 20% penalty on whatever, regardless of the situation.
Just to make it easy.
So when Pandora's actor uses a defensive skill, it's only around 80% as good at reducing damage. When he attacks, he's only doing 80% as much damage. When he's trying to dodge or resist a spell, he's only dodging it 80% as often. When he's trying to inflict a debuff or crowd control, he's only successful 80% as often. And when he tries to heal, he only heals for 80% as much damage.
Again, I would assume that that only is applicable when he's going up against somebody of equal stats, right? Because if he's going up against somebody with much lower stats, then I feel like that those numbers remain high, right? I think.
And that's that. So how significant are all those penalties in a fight? Well, in my initial example, you saw for yourself by the numbers how much of a difference that 20% really makes. Which leads us into the next question. What if a doppelganger gets into a fight with its original?
Okay, cool. This is what I was saying earlier. It's like, why do you not just kill the person you're imitating and take over them forever? Especially if you can get them when they're like sleeping or something.
The two of them trading special attacks back and forth while trying to block and dodge with special abilities. Well, since the doppelganger would only deal around 80% as much damage on offense and would negate around 80% damage on defense, the total penalty would actually come out to be 64%, since they're applied to separate aspects of the fight. The penalties stack, meaning there's the less damage he does overall in combination with the increased damage that he's taking. So to answer the question, by the math, you can fight a doppelganger of yourself and easily beat it with more than a third of your HP left.
Wow.
That said, this example is heavily abstracted, simplified, and generalized. It assumes a very simple fight where they take turns slapping each other with attacks and constantly trying to block or dodge. It doesn't factor in tactics or strategy or special abilities, which could swing the fight radically in one direction or another. Even if you are weaker, if you can ambush your enemy, then it doesn't matter nearly as much. I also don't factor in the impact of crowd control or disables.
Rude.
Hell, Ainz himself has spells which instantly kill the target if they aren't resisted. Like, if you're dead, you can't fight anymore. Of course, the key to figuring all of this out would be what exactly 80% potency means in these cases. Furthermore, there's nothing stopping a doppelganger from changing into a form that gives it a significant advantage over the person it's imitating. And there's a lot of different situations where penalties to particular stats aren't nearly as important. If you transform into a stealthy archer or a ranged attacker and snipe them from a distance while in stealth, you might just be able to get multiple hits off and outright kill them before they can even react. Or you can just rain down artillery on them using heavy bombardment magic. If you're just planning on doing these hit and run tactics, it doesn't matter nearly as much that you have less defensive abilities than someone else. The only thing that really matters in that type of situation is that you do less damage. And it's not like you even need to use a doppelganger to fight. They can imitate craftsmen to build and smith gear, then switch to alchemy and build and make lots of powerful potions, then switch over to a divination build and recon the enemy, then switch to a commander that's built to buff everyone, and then switch back to a combat build to actually fight.
That's
of
really
course,
cool.
they'll just be 20% worse at these things, whatever that means. But as you can tell, there's definitely a lot of things that need to be considered when talking about this reduced potency effect of imitation. Once again, how does it apply to buffs and disables? Does it reduce both the magnitude of the effect and the duration? What about the number of uses or the MP cost? And what about healing?
So it sounds like, at least in D&D terms, like maybe you could fix that by either setting your the DC a little higher for yourself, like, you know, or it's a little bit lower for your opponent, you know. So it's like if you're the original caster, you know, the save might be at like it might be a DC 15, but you're the doppelganger, so their DC is 12. You know, like it's easier to overcome. It's not impossible, but it's easier to. Okay, I can kind of see how this works. I am having fun like putting it into D&D terms and like dice rolls and stuff, so apologies for that if you're not interested.
What does it really look like if I only heal 80% as much as a properly built healer? Does that just mean that I have to spend more mana to heal?
Basically, again, this is something we have in our party right now. We do not have a proper healer. We have two people who can use a somewhat magic to heal. Like we have a ranger and a bard, and both of them can do slight healing spells, but neither of them are going to be as good as a cleric at the healing. So it's like they can do it. They can make things go better, but like they don't have a huge amount of healing ability. So that's another reason that me as my character, I'm like, I'm just gonna stay out of range of enemy attacks as much as possible. Spend a lot of time hiding. Because I'm like, I don't know if they're gonna be able to, because I'm weak. I have like no hit points at all. I have like my HP is weak, my armor class is weak. So I'm like, the best way to not die in like 2 hits is to not get hit. If I had a cleric, I might be a little braver.
Heal that same amount of HP. Those of you who have ever played an MMO know that it's not that simple. Put aside the complicated considerations of overhealing and MP sustain for just a second. You know that if you can't keep pace with the incoming damage as a healer, a single person dropping can lead to a chain reaction of events that just results in a devastating party wipe.
Yep.
Anyway, my whole point regarding all of this is that penalties can actually stack together in unexpected ways and end up being a lot more significant than just 20%. A doppelganger could be massively inferior, or just slightly worse than whatever specialist that they happen to be imitating. It's all situational. But at the end of the day, what a doppelganger sacrifices in raw capability, they make up for in versatility and flexibility. Their form of imitation can round out any party or fill any role. Mechanically speaking, they're less suited for established guilds, and more for solo play or pickup groups.
Okay.
Their use in something like guild combat is exactly what you expect, for deception. They look and play close enough to the original that they can fool the unsuspecting. You can make your forces look more powerful than they really are by mixing in NPC doppelgangers. You could imitate your opponents and trick their friends and guildmates into giving you intel or free stuff. Yggdrasil is a game of information and deception. Ambushes, tactics, and strategy matter a lot more than just raw power. But I think that's where I'm going to wrap it up for today.
Okay.
That's pretty much all the stuff on doppelgangers. But
Cool.
we're only halfway through explaining Pandora's actors' powers and abilities. So be sure to join me next time for part 2 of
All right.
part 2.
Part
Very
2 of
quickly,
part
before I
2.
go once again,
Excellent.
don't forget that the Succubate shirts are
We'll
available
be
through the
back.
link in the description. They're a great way to help support what I do here, while getting something that I hope is nice in return.
I really
But
do like
yeah,
this Nazareth
thank you for
sweatshirt
Gen4 as
thing.
usual for doing the research on this. Thank you guys for watching, and as usual, if you enjoyed this type of anime content, then you already know what to do.
I do. All right. I'm going to give a lovely little like for the video because I do like these videos. I am finding them interesting. So the next time we've got one more Pandora's actor video for next week. And then we are going, then we're going to talk about Sebas. Baby, that's exciting. Okay, I'm really excited to talk about Sebas. I love him. But yeah, so next time we're talking a little bit more about Pandora's actor. I thought that was really interesting to talk about the doppelgangers specifically. And like the things they're good at, the things they're not, and like how do the things mesh together and work. And again, I know I compared it to D&D a lot, but I feel like it's because I've never played like an online RPG. I've never I don't really fully understand MP and like all of that. It's not necessarily something I've ever experienced, so I have to bring it back into something that I have experienced, which is D&D. I have done like I've got some experience with that, not a ton. And again, like I said, it's not like I've played a caster character or someone who's got access to magic. I've played, you know, just a guy, just a squishy guy. So it is interesting for me though to get to see multiple different takes and to sort of just try and see things from outside, like the one little narrow perspective that I have. So I really like these videos. I hope that you enjoyed this one as well, and I will see you all in the next one. Don't forget, if you're watching this on YouTube, to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, comment. All of those things really, really do help. Check out some of our other stuff. Also over on Patreon, we've got these are coming out a little bit early over there. We have got a whole bunch of shows that are happening on Patreon that have not shown up on YouTube. I'm not sure exactly when they will. So Jess and I watched Spice and Wolf, for instance. That's over on Patreon. Alec and I watched Kaiju number 8. That's over on Patreon. I'm watching Castlevania right now. That's over on Patreon. So we've got things that are happening over there that are exclusive to that site. So yeah, thank you again for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye-bye.